What if I told you that some of heavy metal's biggest legends didn't just flirt with chaos? They lived and breathed it until it consumed them. Behind the screaming guitars and the blood-pumping anthems were musicians chasing a high darker than any song they ever wrote. Fame, fortune, and endless parties gave way to a nightmare of addiction that stole their talent, their sanity, and sometimes their lives. These weren't just rock stars. They were walking storms, burning bright before crashing hard. From onstage meltdowns to near-death overdoses, these are the 17 worst junkies in heavy metal history. 17. Cliff Burton. Cliff Burton wasn't a junkie, but his story fits here because his death became a symbol of how unpredictable and cruel the heavy metal lifestyle could be. While many around him were lost in drugs and chaos, Cliff stood out for his focus, talent, and calm energy. He was Metallica's secret weapon, the man whose bass lines gave their music depth and emotion. But even in a world of hard partying and non-stop touring, no one could escape the danger that came with life on the road. In 1986, Metallica's tour bus was speeding through Sweden on a freezing night. The roads were slick, and the band had been exhausted from endless shows. Suddenly, the bus skidded and flipped. Cliff, asleep in his bunk, was thrown through the window and crushed as the vehicle came down. He died instantly. The others survived, but nothing was ever the same. Cliff's death didn't come from addiction, but it forced Metallica and the entire heavy metal world to look in the mirror. It showed that living on the edge, surrounded by drugs, alcohol, and chaos, would always come with a price. Even the purest soul could become another casualty of the madness. Cliff Burton's end wasn't caused by a needle or a bottle, but it was born from the same reckless world that claimed so many others. 16. Sid Vicious. Sid Vicious was raw energy, chaos, and destruction wrapped inside a skinny frame with a sneer that defined punk's rebellious spirit. He joined the Sex Pistols barely knowing how to play his instrument, yet his wild attitude made him a legend overnight. Fame hit him fast, and drugs hit even faster. Heroin became his closest friend, his worst enemy, and the reason his life spun out of control before it even truly began. Sid's relationship with Nancy Spungen turned into one of the most toxic love stories in music history. The two fed off each other's pain, diving deeper into addiction as their fame grew. They were inseparable and unstoppable in their self-destruction. By 1978, Sid was already falling apart. His music career crumbled and his mental state collapsed. Then came the night that ended it all. Nancy was found dead from a stab wound in a New York hotel room. Sid was arrested for her murder, though no one ever learned what really happened. Just months later, while out on bail, he overdosed on heroin at a party. He was only 21. Sid Vicious didn't fade away. He exploded, burning out faster than anyone before him. His story became a grim warning of what happens when addiction and fame collide, leaving behind only noise, chaos, and silence. 15. Hillel Slovak. Before the Red Hot Chili Peppers became global icons, there was Hillel Slovak, a fiery guitarist whose sound helped define their early chaos. He wasn't just a musician, he was the heartbeat of a new style, mixing funk, punk, and metal. But behind his bright energy was a deep addiction that refused to let him go. Hillel loved the rush of music almost as much as he loved heroin, and that dangerous mix started eating him alive. Through the early 1980s, the band's shows were wild, and drugs were always part of the scene. As the Chili Peppers began rising, Hillel's addiction grew worse. Friends begged him to get clean, but every attempt at sobriety ended the same way, with relapse and guilt. In 1988, just after returning from a European tour, Hillel was found dead in his apartment from a heroin overdose. He was only 26. His death shattered his bandmates, especially Anthony Kiedis and Flea, who were also caught in the same drug scene. Losing Hillel forced them to face how deadly their lifestyle had become. His passing marked a turning point, the beginning of their fight to survive addiction and keep the band alive. Hillel Slovak's story became a brutal reminder that even the brightest flame can burn out in an instant when drugs take control. 14. Peter Steele. Peter Steele was a towering figure, both in presence and in sound. As the frontman of Type O Negative, he created music that was dark, haunting, and strangely beautiful, much like his own life. Behind his deep voice and gothic charm was a man haunted by addiction, depression, and inner pain. He battled cocaine, alcohol, and the chaos of fame, often hiding his struggles behind sarcasm and dark humor. Peter's image was powerful, but his reality was fragile. Years of substance abuse wore him down, both mentally and physically. He disappeared from the public eye for long stretches, leaving fans worried and confused. Though he found moments of sobriety and faith, the shadows never completely left him. In 2010, Peter Steele died suddenly from heart failure, believed to be linked to years of hard living. He was just 48. His death crushed fans who saw him as larger than life, a man who seemed untouchable, yet behind that intimidating look and thunderous music was a soul that couldn't escape its demons. Peter's addiction didn't just end his life. It colored his art, shaping every song into a reflection of pain, loss, and fleeting beauty. His voice may have fallen silent, but its echo still carries the weight of every battle he fought against himself. 13. Randy Rhoads. Randy Rhoads didn't battle addiction, but his death was still. Born from the reckless world of drugs and metal excess. He was Ozzy Osbourne's young guitar genius, disciplined, focused, and determined to stay clean even while surrounded by chaos. While Ozzy and his crew were known for heavy drinking and cocaine-fueled nights, Randy kept his distance. His goal was music, not madness. But on one tragic morning in 1982, that didn't matter. The band's bus stopped near Leesburg, Florida. Their driver, Andrew Aycock, who had been up all night using cocaine, decided to take a small plane for a joyride with Randy and a makeup artist on board. In a reckless attempt to buzz the tour bus, the plane's wing clipped it and crashed into a nearby house, exploding into flames. Everyone on board died instantly. Randy was only 25. His loss devastated Ozzy and changed him forever. It showed that addiction doesn't only destroy those who use, it destroys everyone in its path. Randy's death became one of rock's greatest tragedies, a sober man taken by someone else's high. His story stands as proof that even innocence isn't safe when drugs and recklessness take over a world built on extremes. 12. Duff McKagan. Duff McKagan was living every rock star's dream, fame, money, and endless parties as the bassist for Guns N' Roses. But behind the glamorous life was a brutal truth. Duff was drinking himself to death. By the early 90s, his alcohol intake was unbelievable. He'd start his mornings with vodka and keep going until he passed out. Years of abuse caught up with him in 1994, when he woke up in agony, rushed to the hospital, and learned that his pancreas had exploded from alcohol damage. Doctors told him he was days away from dying. That moment changed everything. Duff quit drinking cold turkey and began rebuilding his life. He took up martial arts, changed his diet, and focused on staying sober. It wasn't easy. Years of addiction don't disappear overnight, but he refused to go back. Duff's recovery became one of metal's rare redemption stories. While many of his peers didn't survive their habits, he managed to turn his pain into power. His body may have been broken, but his will was stronger. Today, Duff stands as living proof that even the worst junkies can fight their way back when they finally decide to stop running from themselves. 11. Mike Starr. Mike Starr's story is one of heartbreak, guilt, and a slow descent that no one could stop. As the original bassist of Alice in Chains, he helped shape the band's haunting sound during their rise in the early 90s. But behind the success was a dark addiction to drugs that would follow him for the rest of his life. When the band's frontman, Lane Staley, sank deeper into heroin use, Mike couldn't pull himself out either. Eventually, his behavior became too unpredictable, and he was kicked out of the band in 1993. Years later, after Lane's death, Mike was consumed by regret. He often spoke about the last time he saw Lane alive, saying he felt responsible for not helping him. The guilt only fueled his own addiction further. He tried to get clean through reality shows like Celebrity Rehab, showing moments of hope that never lasted. In 2011, Mike Starr was found dead from a prescription drug overdose at only 44 years old. His story mirrored Lane's in a haunting way. Two friends who shared talent, pain, and the same tragic ending. Mike's death proved that sometimes guilt can be just as deadly as the drugs themselves. 10. Andrew Wood. Andrew Wood was supposed to be the next big thing in rock. As the frontman of Mother Love Bone, his mix of glam attitude and grunge energy made him one of Seattle's brightest hopes before the world even knew the grunge scene was coming. He had charisma, talent, and a stage presence that made everyone believe he was destined for greatness. But behind that confident smile was a man fighting an addiction that wouldn't let go. Heroin had been part of Andrew's life long before fame. Even when he tried to hide it, the people closest to him saw how deep it ran. In 1990, just days before Mother Love Bone's debut album release, Andrew overdosed in his apartment. He fell into a coma and never woke up. He was only 24 years old. His death shattered his bandmates and friends. Chris Cornell, his roommate and best friend, wrote Temple of the Dog as a tribute, while the remaining members of Mother Love Bone later formed Pearl Jam. Andrew's passing became the spark that ignited the entire Seattle movement. But he never lived to see it. His addiction didn't just take his life. It robbed the world of a star who could have changed rock forever. 9. James Hetfield. James Hetfield's battle with addiction was quieter than most, but no less destructive. As the frontman of Metallica, he was the voice of strength and power, yet behind the scenes he was falling apart. Years of touring, pressure, and internal rage pushed him toward alcohol, his way of numbing everything he didn't want to face. To the world, he looked untouchable. In reality, he was drinking himself into isolation. By the early 2000s, his addiction had grown so severe that even his bandmates could see he was on the edge. During the making of Saint Anger, James reached his breaking point. He left the band to check into rehab, a decision that saved both his life and Metallica itself. Sobriety forced him to confront everything he'd buried under years of drinking: insecurity, anger, and fear of losing control. James eventually returned stronger, both as a man and a musician, but the road hasn't been easy. Even years later, he's admitted that the fight against addiction never really ends. It just quiets down. His story stands as one of metal's most powerful examples of survival. The man who wrote about darkness found his own light by facing it head on. 8. Phil Anselmo. Phil Anselmo was the explosive frontman of Pantera, raw energy, aggression, and pure chaos wrapped in one of metal's most commanding voices. On stage, he looked like a warrior. Off stage, he was at war with himself. Years of relentless touring and pressure pushed him toward heroin and painkillers, drugs that slowly turned his confidence into destruction. During the mid-90s, Phil's addiction spiraled out of control. His bandmates noticed his behavior changing, violent outbursts, disappearing for days, and emotional breakdowns. In 1996, things reached a terrifying point when he overdosed on heroin and had to be revived after his heart stopped. He survived, but it left a permanent scar on both him and Pantera. His struggle continued for years, fueling conflicts that eventually tore the band apart. Phil later admitted that his addiction came from trying to numb the pain of physical injuries and emotional chaos. Though he eventually found sobriety, the damage was already done. The once unstoppable frontman became a living reminder of how even the strongest can fall when the drugs take over. 7. Lane Staley. Lane Staley's voice defined a generation, haunting, emotional, and painfully real. As the frontman of Alice in Chains, his lyrics about darkness and addiction weren't fiction, they were confessions. Behind his powerful stage presence was a man slowly being eaten alive by heroin. In the early 90s, when his band was exploding, Lane was already withdrawing from the world. His girlfriend, Demry Parrott, who also struggled with addiction, passed away in 1996, breaking him completely. From that moment, Lane vanished from public life. Friends rarely saw him, and when they did, he was thin, fragile, and lost. He continued to make music but avoided fame entirely. In 2002, police discovered his body in his apartment. He had been dead for nearly 2 weeks. Lane was only 34 years old. His death was heartbreaking, not just because of his talent, but because everyone saw it coming and couldn't stop it. He had sung about addiction, begged for freedom through his lyrics, and still couldn't escape it. Lane Staley became one of metal's most tragic figures, a man whose voice carried pain too heavy to survive. 6. Scott Weiland. Scott Weiland was the ultimate rock star, magnetic, stylish, and unpredictable. As the frontman for Stone Temple Pilots and later Velvet Revolver, his voice could move from soft emotion to raw fury in seconds. But his brilliance came with a dark side. From his earliest success in the early 90s, Scott was trapped in a cycle of heroin use, arrests, and rehab visits that seemed never-ending. He tried to fight his addiction many times, but fame made it harder. Every comeback was followed by another fall, every clean stretch shattered by relapse. His bands tried to support him, but his behavior became too erratic to handle. He was fired multiple times, only to return like a man chasing redemption he could never reach. In December 2015, Scott Weiland was found dead on his tour bus from an accidental overdose. He was 48. His death hit hard because it wasn't shocking. It was expected, yet still devastating. Scott's story was one of immense talent, destroyed by an addiction that refused to let go. He didn't just sing about pain. He lived inside it until it finally took him away. 5. Dave Mustaine. Dave Mustaine's journey from chaos to clarity is one of metal's most intense transformations. Fired from Metallica in the early 80s for his violent temper and heavy drug use, Dave spiraled into anger and addiction. Determined to prove himself, he formed Megadeth, but his old demons followed him. Cocaine, heroin, and alcohol ruled his life, fueling both his creativity and destruction. During the late 80s and early 90s, Dave's drug use became legendary. He'd stay awake for days, then crash into paranoia and rage. His bandmates feared him, yet couldn't deny his genius. But even talent has limits. By the mid-90s, his body and mind began breaking down. He overdosed multiple times, lost his arm's nerve control at one point, and faced homelessness after being kicked out of rehab. In the early 2000s, something changed. Dave turned to faith, got sober, and rebuilt his life from the ground up. He relearned how to play guitar, rebuilt Megadeth, and found peace after decades of chaos. His story is proof that even the worst junkies can rise again, if they're willing to destroy the old version of themselves first. 4. / looked like he was built to live forever. Top hat, cigarette, and a guitar that screamed louder than life itself. But behind the cool image was a man running on the edge of death. During Guns N' Roses' wildest years, Slash's drug and alcohol use was out of control. Cocaine, heroin, pills, it didn't matter. He'd mix everything, chasing highs that made his music electric, but his life chaotic. By 1992, his heart literally stopped for 8 minutes after a heroin overdose. Doctors managed to bring him back, but the damage was done. His health spiraled, his relationships broke apart, and even his band couldn't hold together under the pressure. Slash became what he called a functioning junkie, still touring, still playing, but dying a little more each night. In the mid-90s, he finally hit his limit. Years of abuse had left his heart scarred, forcing him to make a choice: quit or die. Slash entered rehab and fought his way back to life. Today, he's one of the few from that era who survived to tell the tale. His story isn't just about addiction, it's about resurrection. The man who once lived like a ghost found his way back to the living, guitar still in hand. 3. Lemmy Kilmister. If rock had a spirit animal, it would have been Lemmy Kilmister. He was the ultimate rebel, a cigarette in one hand, whiskey in the other, and a lifetime of stories that sound too wild to believe. Lemmy wasn't just a musician, he was an idea. He lived harder, partied longer, and drank more than almost anyone in metal history. But somehow, he kept going when everyone else burned out. For decades, Lemmy's daily routine was unthinkable: speed, Jack Daniels, and no sleep. He claimed he was never truly addicted because he could handle it. Yet the truth was that his body had simply adapted to chaos. Fans saw him as unbreakable, the man who couldn't die. But years of hard living finally caught up to him. By his 70s, Lemmy's health began to collapse. He was diagnosed with cancer in 2015 and died just 2 days later. Even in his final moments, he refused to change his lifestyle. Lemmy never hid his vices, never pretended to be something he wasn't. He lived exactly how he wanted, right up to the end. His story stands as both a warning and a legend, proof that not even the strongest rebel can outrun time forever. 2. Nikki Sixx. Nikki Sixx's addiction story reads like a horror movie that somehow ends with redemption. As the bassist and songwriter for Motley Crue, he lived every excess imaginable. Heroin was his god, and fame gave him all the power to feed it. By the late 80s, his habit was costing thousands a day. He overdosed so often that his friends started expecting it. But one night in 1987 changed everything. Nikki was found unresponsive after injecting a deadly dose of heroin. Paramedics declared him dead, but one refused to give up. He injected adrenaline straight into Nikki's heart, bringing him back to life. Hours later, Nikki woke up in the hospital and ripped out his IV, heading straight home to shoot up again. It took years, more overdoses, and complete mental collapse before he finally quit. That near-death moment inspired "Kickstart My Heart," a song that became his victory anthem. Nikki eventually got clean, wrote the Heroin Diaries, and turned his pain into art that helped others fight addiction. He truly lived to tell the story, twice. His survival wasn't luck, it was a second chance, earned through hell and recovery. 1. Ozzy Osbourne. No one embodies the word junkie like Ozzy Osbourne. The man who defined heavy metal also defined destruction. Drugs, alcohol, and madness followed him everywhere, from his Black Sabbath days to his solo career. He snorted, drank, smoked, and swallowed anything he could find. People called him indestructible, but the truth was darker. Ozzy wasn't living. He was barely surviving. Throughout the 70s and 80s, his days blurred together in a haze of cocaine and booze. He was fired from Black Sabbath for being too wild, which says everything about how far gone he was. His infamous antics, biting the head off a bat, urinating on the Alamo, weren't just rock star moments. They were cries for help, masked as chaos. Doctors told him repeatedly that his body shouldn't still be functioning. His DNA was later studied because scientists couldn't figure out how he was still alive. Through it all, Sharon Osbourne became his anchor, guiding him toward sobriety more than once. Though he slipped at times, Ozzy's still standing, proof that even the worst junkie in heavy metal history can outlast his own destruction. Ozzy's story isn't just about survival. It's about what happens when madness becomes myth. He's not just the Prince of Darkness. He's the king of second chances. They lived fast, played harder, and paid the ultimate price for it. Some found redemption before it was too late, while others became cautionary tales written in shattered guitars and broken dreams. So, which of these heavy metal junkies shocked you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button if you love uncovering the darker side of rock, and don't forget to subscribe, because the next story will take you even deeper into heavy metal's wildest and most tragic secrets.